also is an interesting subject because most of us, the record at PIM is that out of every 5 guys who do an MBA, 2 become entrepreneurs. This is our record at PIM. The alumni, we find that 20%, 2 out of every 10, 20%, one out every 5 becomes an entrepreneur. Now, this word entrepreneur is a very broad word today. Originally it meant that you start your own business, but sometimes we are looking at innovators also as entrepreneurs. People in organizations sometimes who head divisions, sometimes who are very innovative, are also entrepreneurial. So there is another term for that. As you remember, we call them intrapreneurs, people within organizations. Where the PIM guys have been concerned, a lot of people do consultancy and developing entrepreneurs as well. While they are doing their normal work, people who like to, follow a career path in organizations, they have another avenue, that is they do consultancy. And a lot of guys actually are developing entrepreneurs. For the last 15 years or so, I have been on this Entrepreneur of the Year panel. Last year I stepped down and gave one of our new lecturers to take that place. But something that I found out during the last few days, how these people make applications for, I can see some of our lecture stuff coming in. So I was wondering how that happened, especially in the presentation of the application form is really good, and it is having designs, structures and figures and things like that from my notes. So I was trying to find out how this happened, and I once asked one of the small business guys how he managed to do that. So he said they have a consultant. So I asked, who is this consultant? To see, one of our MBA guys. Right? So, like that. So that's good sometimes, because there is about 80% of our businesses are small businesses in Sri Lanka really. And they are stuck. They don't move beyond that because one of the constraining factors for entrepreneurs, small business guys, is that they can't manage. They have innovative products sometimes. They bring it up to some point, but they don't know sometimes how to invest. They don't know sometimes how to develop a cash cow. If you develop a cash cow with your first product, that can be a source of internal funding for other things. But before it becomes a source of internal funding, they start investing on something else. So ultimately that first product also does not develop into a high level. So very often they are very skeptical also of professionals, because sometimes professionals they try to make the entrepreneur a little more conservative, right? By not allowing them to take risks and things like that. So there is a conflict always. So sometimes understanding the nature of the entrepreneur and giving enough of room for innovation, because an entrepreneur may fail 10 times, but he'll succeed. The idea is sometimes people have been trying to study entrepreneurs from various angles. The first guys who studied entrepreneurs were economists. About 300 years ago, people started studying this factor that some people are prepared to be independent, they don't want to work for others, they start businesses and they employ people. So they were trying to study the nature of those people. And what the economists said is, these guys actually sometimes are the mainstay of any economy. So the economists were first interested in entrepreneurship, that people will take and bear the risk of starting something. In fact, the word entrepreneur is a French word. It was coined by economist called Jean-Baptiste Say, a French guy, which means the word entrepreneur means entree. Entree means to enter into some field like a marketing or some field like that, a market. And preneur actually means to take the risk, to bear the risk. So enter and bear the risk. That's how this word came, entrepreneur. So a lot of people had tried to study that, but as time went on, they found that there are other sociologists started getting interested in entrepreneurship. Like, why do entrepreneurs come from particular groups of people, particular cultures? And you'll find that very often in some cultures, it's a survival mechanism for that culture. Very often they have one particular researcher called Everett Hagen, he was a sociologist. He was studying why entrepreneurs, there were more entrepreneurs in minorities. In fact, he had a very strange thing. He found out that there were more entrepreneurs in minorities than majorities per thousand. So he was interested to know why that happened. When he studied that, he found that minorities particularly were somewhat marginalized from the mainstream, and there was a crush factor exerted by the majorities. So as a survival mechanism, these guys actually developed stronger networks among themselves. Their cultures were stronger, and even when they started some business, they could form supply chains within their own families. Now this was even studies of Sri Lankan entrepreneurs. We found that especially in Moratuwa, those areas, particularly among the woodcraft entrepreneurs, they found that even the tree was cut down by one member of the family. It was sawn into planks by one member. Another member actually converted that into furniture, and another guy sold it. So if it was within the family and they had very strong networks, that was better than any supply chain, because information flowed faster, and also the ability of credit among families. Credit can go into what's known as emotional bank balance. Right? So in other words, sometimes people will give it and they will not expect immediate returns, but there is an obligation. So they found that among certain cultures, there were more entrepreneurs. Even when I did my MBA way back in 1989, the famous Bhishana period. 89 was a Bhishana period, no? So I studied low country entrepreneurs, southern entrepreneurs, because what happens is, for two reasons. One is, of course, I was interested in entrepreneurship, and at that time I was a business development manager, so I was developing businesses in the organization. This thing was very interesting for me. Another reason was because my mother is from down south, so we don't know who those people are. I thought good opportunity for me to go and try to find out my roots. So that's one reason. The other reason is I finished my MBA in 1.5 years. Because along with another friend of mine, the famous General Secretary of the JVP at that time, Lionel Bopage, my own batchmate, we finished the MBA in 1.5 years, because halfway through say, what a pain this is, you know, right? Right? And without PIM knowledge, we did 4 subjects in one semester. So by 1.5 years, we had finished all the subjects. So at the same time, both of us got merit also. So the fact is that if you are pushed into a kind of a situation where you have to work hard, you really work hard. So, so anyway, I did this thing, and I found some interesting factors in the south. At that time, if you look at even today, most of the businesses, the entrepreneurs have come from the south. Most, I would say, large percentage. It is changing. But at the time I did that research in '89, it was interesting to find out why that was. So I went and studied this. So that's the sociological, ethnological study of entrepreneurship. So I think the sociologists were the second people who were interested to know something about entrepreneurs. Then came the psychologists. Psychologists were interested to know what a drive is, what these guys' drives are. Whether these are latent in all of us. And what they found is, yeah, there are some, we all have those drives, but you need to be provoked in some way. And very often to be provoked, you have to have a triggering event. Something must happen in your life, something or the other, and then suddenly you jump into this. So these things are within us. Some of the drives, like the need to achieve. The need to achieve, that is, we want to achieve things. I mean, basically, need to achieve, we don't say what, but so many things. I can remember bringing an entrepreneur to my, actually students bring entrepreneurs to a class. They brought a guy really who, I think I must have told you about this guy who was a peon. He was one of these KKS, right? Karyala, Karya Sahaya. But he had a talent. His talent was during these period ceremonies, he can cut the mandapa designs and all those things like that. He can do that, and he was known for that. So one day this guy, actually they had to do some delivery also to houses, and he had gone to deliver this. This is he was talking about this, right? To a house in Horton Place, and he was really stunned. He said, "Look, life is like this. Why can't I also be like this one day?" He was in his mind. This picture was there, but it was impossible for him. I mean, it was only a dream like, but it remained in his mind. So what happened is, then a triggering event occurred. That is, one of the peons had done some fraud or something, and the whole lot were sacked. So this guy actually was wondering what to do. Then one of the guys in the, one of the managers went and asked him, could you do something, in the sense that, could you make some party hats for children? So this guy, he said, no problem. But he asked how many? He said, there is no limit. So there, eventually this guy developed the ability to make party hats because of his diligence and also that attention to detail. He was really good. So he is now telling this story in the class. And he said ultimately today, the time this happened about 5 years ago, he was exporting 6 container loads of hats abroad, and he is living in Horton Place. So, I mean, these are very interesting things about people. That is, if you have the drive, all what you need is a triggering event. Something must happen in your life where you suddenly go. So the psychologists were interested in those drives. Today we have drives, what we studied under psychology, like need for achievement, need for power. People need power also. Sometimes they, for a good reason. I mean, sometimes someone will say, look, I want to develop my family. I want to make my family more powerful. I want to make my clan more powerful. Right? The extended family. So these ideas are there in people. And the other one is they found that there is a need for affiliation also. People want to have social networks. To be a powerful individual in a social network. So these are drives. So psychologists were interested in drives. So the thing went from psychologists, today people are studying physiological reasons why you might be an entrepreneur. Say your body structure, your fitness, all that kind of thing has something to do with entrepreneurship. Say you can be entrepreneurial. These guys should look at the physiological study of entrepreneurs. Is that entrepreneurs have higher energy levels than other people. So they want to know why that is. So they say metabolism. Sometimes metabolism, the way you digest food and things like that, how fast you can convert food energy into mind and physical energy, and you are restless. Right? So you have to get up and go. They don't sleep easily sometimes, and as a result of it, physiologists are interested. Then we are going back to that, sometimes an old theory which says that you are born as an entrepreneur. So genome guys are also now studying genetics, that you might have a gene which is passed down from your family over a couple of generations. Your parents may not be entrepreneurial, but along the way someone might have been entrepreneurial. So what they are finding is this DNA structure, you know the DNA structure, along the stem of the DNA, there are some switches, some small switches which can be opened or closed. Now they are saying that either you can physically open the switch. Some guy in previous generation, due to his actions, might have opened one of those switches, and therefore it's passed down onto you. Maybe 2-3 generations, it might skip a couple of generations, and you don't know why. Family might be very conservative family, but one guy in the family might be totally different. In fact, if you look at Sri Lankan examples or you look at Cargills, for example, all those guys are mostly, they are kind of financial guys. They are a bit laid back but very conservative, except for the Ranjit Page guy. Something wrong with that guy. If you look at him, he is different from the other people. And people will wonder how in a very conservative family a guy like this can be born. So it's a genome thing. So people are also now interested in this kind of thing. All fields of study are interested in this subject now. The fact is that this is the survival of the human race. Unless people take risk and go forward and lead other people, the human race does not survive. So there is a mechanism in the human race also, from time to time, that people emerge who take the thing forward through innovation, looking at new ways of doing things. One of the most powerful behaviors of an entrepreneur is innovation. Entrepreneurs are innovative. You have to just do some small thing. So you must, actually you should be able to see things a little different from what other people see. So in other words, you know this, all people fall into the normal distribution. 66 and 1/6% of people are normal. The other guys see the world in a different way. When you actually step out of that normal, the world looks different. And you see different things. Like for example, typically, say some of the Indian entrepreneurs who have been starting to do unusual things. There is this guy, you know, the Chinese guys were wondering, you know, the top loader cheap washing machine is selling like hell in India. So they were very curious to find out why that was. To see people are making yogurt with that. It's totally different, right? They are making yogurt. So, I mean, they can make large quantities of yogurt in a top loader cheap washing machine. So, in India, yogurt is a very popular thing, as you know, and it's mass scale produced. So, in India, you get some guys like that. They are called some particular type of entrepreneurs, Jago or something like that, I can't remember. Another set of guys had taken old railway carriages and put it on lorries. So that people, they can park in some place and people can get in like into a, in our country of course these are rustic. But if you just get a lorry chassis and put one of those things, you can carry people in that. Right? So these kind of innovations, they are innovations actually. Looking a little differently of something, or sometimes fusing two things together and creating a new thing. Very simple to be innovative. Right? You can be, inventive is a different thing. Inventive starts with R&D, research and development. But innovative is to see something a little differently and bring it into the market. So these are extremely interesting things. This subject, of course, is very curious. I was very curious about this subject. That is how I got into kind of my first lecturing at PIM in 1990. So this subject I started teaching first. There was a guy who taught entrepreneurship even to me. He was an economist. So he brought some curiosity to me in this subject in some way or the other, but I was interested in the other sides of it. Why people are doing this, and sometimes talking to people like even Siddhalepa and people like that. Why they are doing this, I mean. So these are interesting observations. We have good entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka. Our problem, what we see is sometimes there is no networking among them. Because if you want to be innovative, you can't innovate alone. You have to always get other people's ideas also. You need to bounce ideas. You might always ask the question, what do you think? You have some crazy idea, you should ask someone else, what do you think about this? Immediately you get a little bit of knowledge from that guy also which comes in. It actually adds on. So it's always a networking kind of thing that creates innovation. That's what we find today. So this interesting subject, where PIM is concerned, it's now a core subject. When I started teaching, it was elective, but it became a compulsory elective. Everyone used to follow that. A lot of guys want to start their own businesses, at least to do consultancy. for other guys. So we have a lot of consultants also, and we have some very innovative CEOs. People like Vagapiti and all, very innovative CEOs who benefited by the course in some way or the other. They had their own ideas, but when you suddenly they now understand why they work like that. That's the whole idea. This subject teaches. It's a theoretical subject, really speaking, because people have done research on this. And this particular thing is partly practical, I would say, but there are a lot of theories. Because why? Because people are still doing research at PIM in entrepreneurship. I am supervising most of the research, and they go deep into the theory part of this. So this course, which is the core course, helps a lot of people. It will help someone who wants to do research. It will also help someone who wants to be a consultant. It will also help this is a good thing. You can, while working, you can be a consultant to a lot of SMEs. SMEs particularly are areas which have to get more management knowledge and things like that. They may have a brilliant product, but it won't go. They won't be able to sustain it without some management knowledge as well. Then the other area is that you might be an entrepreneur, and then you might not like to work in organizations so much in your life. You will all want to have some experience in organizations, but take the chance and start your own business and move like that. So it has so many areas of interest. Of course, we have an advantage when we are teaching entrepreneurship at PIM, because all the core subjects have been taught by that time. Finance, marketing, HR, operations, they have already been taught. In the typical entrepreneurship course, if you are taking people newly, you have to teach those subjects. So we have already taught that, and this is what we call a capstone course. That is, you put these ideas, very little to talk about, really speaking, right? But to encourage people and also show how things have been done, and also bounce off ideas. That's why we invite entrepreneurs. Because at the end of any entrepreneur's talk, people are saying, okay, why not we? You know, we also can do the same thing. What's so different? So this is something to risk. Also, risk is a thing we look at. Entrepreneurs are not high risk takers, but they are moderate risk takers. But moderate means more than the normal person. If a normal person will take risk like 3 opportunities out of 10 opportunities with 30%, an entrepreneur will take about 5 opportunities out of 10, something like that. So we call that moderate risk taking, or calculated risk taking, or educated risk taking. You were quite different to the gambler's risk taking, totally jumping into total blindness without knowing what's happening. That is more like risk, high risk, gambler's level. Now we are not talking about gambler's level, talking about very normal levels, stretching a little bit, taking a chance. Sometimes we tell very practical things in the class. Like next time at a party, very often people go and when they go for a party, they go and gravitate with their friends. You can see immediately clustering, or sitting in the classroom always with group. We tell them, try not to do that. When next time you go for a party, go and talk to someone who you have never met before. Right? You take a little bit of risk. But when you take that risk, a few new doors open, windows open. Because that person will say something you have never heard before. Because if you are in the same gene pool, your ideas are in the same gene pool. The moment you move out, it's a little bit risky, because you don't know who the guy is. But taking that small risk is this opportunity, where the opportunities come. Another very important thing is to get the talent of seeing opportunities in a lot of things. Every second, you see opportunities. So sometimes we say, okay, when you come next time to the class, tell us what you saw. Did you see opportunity on the road? Sometimes things look really bad, but if it is so that there is opportunity, what you can do? A product might be the result of something that is going bad. You know, you have got a solution for it. Or you see something and say, look, I can do this better than that. Or you have an experience in the supermarket and say, no, this is not the way things should be done. Now, one of the biggest opportunity observers is Richard Branson. He is not a expert in any of those 1,000-odd businesses he has. But he has a keen idea of seeing opportunities, but he can't do it. His other skill is that he is an excellent people's person. So he knows how to recruit talent, how to identify talent, and retain talent, and also develop talent. That part of it is his total success if we are trying to say it in a simple way. But he has a risk-taking ability which is definitely higher than other people. Otherwise he won't be flying out in balloons and trying to go to space and things like that. So he's a different guy that way. Of course he attributes that to some childhood experience. That's another thing I discovered when I was doing research in the South. Is that the parents sometimes brought their children up in a slightly different way. That is, if a kid fell on the ground, sometimes they will say, okay, get up. Come on, get up and cheer the guy when he gets up. Quite different to running and picking up the child. It creates, according to psychologists, a dependence syndrome. Every time you get into a problem, you expect someone to help you. So this idea about independence training seemed to be a very powerful thing that some parents did. So it's risky again. Somebody sending a kid to the boutique at the age of 5 or 6 years or something is a big risk. So especially it's risky. But if you look at Richard Branson, he talks about how his mother had dropped him and his brother at a petrol station 5 miles away, and told him to walk home. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, and she had driven off in the car, and these guys came a couple of hours later. Can you imagine doing that to a kid? So what Richard Branson says, if you do today, if she did it today, she would have been in the police station. So, I mean, create some kind of a, so these early parenting things are also another area that sociologists have studied. So it's an interesting subject. You can take your own view on the thing as you develop. My view, of course, was that I challenged some of the Western, when I wrote my research, I challenged some of the Western thinking and said, look, there is a cultural thing also. One reason why some of our countries, developing countries, now we are middle income country, is not going forward is sometimes due to the colonization syndrome. It created a dependence syndrome. And then we are waiting till the Suddha comes and tells us what to do. Right? There are so many innovators, but we don't listen to those guys. Even any Suddha is generally appreciated sometimes better than, that's because of 450 years of colonization. So we are now in a bit of a peculiar situation. So we have to look at how this can be developed as well. So these are issues actually for research and observation and also personal kind of things. Okay, this first introduction session is just talking about some of these ideas in a very basic way. Right. So sometimes we are, what we normally talk about is why is very important to study entrepreneurship and it's too powerful, right? Right. I think I can talk like this, no? This, is it better to with the mic or? Yes, that's right. Okay. Yeah. So entrepreneurship is an important subject for any economy. That is, an economy grows because of entrepreneurs. People who have new ideas, who put new ideas into action, implement new ideas, and take the risk of sometimes going against the stream also. So it's an important area. Then we are also very basically we are talking about what makes an entrepreneur. In other words, if you are trying to dissect an entrepreneur, what would you see? Right? These are things that come from research. Right? These we are looking from the research side of it. Also, there are some very practical sides. 7 Ps are just like marketing also has Ps. Entrepreneurship also has developed some Ps. That is sometimes good to remember. Some things that what we are saying is from a management school point of view, like PIM or any other management school, Harvard or wherever, our assumption is you can develop entrepreneurs. That is, you can make even a highly laid back guy into an entrepreneur. That is the assumption. We are having that assumption. So therefore we go through a series of behavioral modifications of certain behaviors. We get sometimes people to focus on some areas that they are not looking very sharply. Now, even if you are driving in a car, whether you observe what's happening on the pavement. Now, you drive at very high speeds. Sometimes not a very good idea to see what's happening on the pavement, right? But at a junction or some place like that, whether you can pick up some ideas about life in general. So there are things like that. And also, how do you become an entrepreneur? Path to success, a very practical side of it. Just a brief thing, we'll be going into depth on each session. We talk about these things. So as I mentioned, it's a body of knowledge. Entrepreneurship, as presented in this core subject, is a body of knowledge. So it's like any other subject. It has a research part, it has a theory part, and things like that. Later on, very often at PI, we have this other subject called small business, which is a practical thing, how to start a business. It's a very practical thing, no theories, and just only practices, which is an elective. And very often all the guys who want to do small business or startup generally follow that. That's how it started. That also became something like a flood, in the sense that people want to come in, and I find it very difficult at PIM, because if you get more than 100 people, it's very difficult. You can't get them to put them into sessions and manage. So my ideal size for small business thing is about 35 to 40 ideas. So it's easy to generate ideas and things like that in small groups, because very little lecturing in that. It's always only monitoring and getting ideas and things like that. Hello. Yeah, so here are some ideas of entrepreneurship. One of the key researchers in entrepreneurship was David McClelland. David McClelland actually was a Harvard professor in psychology. Just like Muhammad Yunus was interested in looking at not lecturing and trying to do some practical thing and develop the Grameen Bank, what McClelland, long time before Yunus of course, 1960s, he did a research, and one question that he had in his mind is that why some societies grow more than the others. And he found out that the societies that grew had more innovations, and even the people were more innovative, and therefore there was a growth of society. In history, he found that there were ups and downs. Like for example, if you look in the 2000 years ago, Greece was a very innovative society. Everything came out of that, no? The mathematics mostly, and even music for that matter. People like Pythagoras were the inventors of the octave. Can you imagine that? The octave was innovated by Pythagoras, right? And even the philosophy that was there at that time. No, Pythagoras. Yeah, Socrates, those three famous guys, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. They came out actually, they were looking at the inner mind and all that kind of thing like that. They were very innovative. Even Egypt for that matter was a very innovative society, time of Ramesses II. I'm talking a little bit of that And he was interested to know why there were these ups and downs. And what in his research he found out that about 50 years preceding a rise of a society, the children were introduced to things like heroic heroes, certain heroes, and all the literature was heroic literature, and that created some kind of a need for achievement. His important contribution to the study of entrepreneurship was bringing out this this concept called need for achievement, NH, which he is talking about. These are pointed, right?
The middle.
Right. NH. He brought that concept out. It's not a new concept. People have been knowing that. Even in Buddhist literature, for example, among the 10 transcendental virtues, there is this thing called Adhisthana and Virya, right? which talks about like a normal person should have that. To develop, you need to have these two very powerful things, balanced with a lot of soft things. Otherwise, you don't last. So this was found out earlier. Now what McClellan did was, he tried to understand what societies did to build NH in people. And some of the things he found out was this behavior of child rearing practices of parents, what they did. For example, they related stories about heroes, people who changed the landscape of society and things like that, people who went through difficulties to risks to do something heroic, and also that they developed a sense of responsibility among the children to do things. Then he said, looking at some of the societies, why they were backward, he tried to do certain, he actually focused on 3 countries. The 3 countries were India, Malawi and Ecuador, 3 countries. And he tried to do his experiment, and he took small groups of people and did some training and developed their NH. And he found that those guys actually then eventually saw their life differently, and they started businesses and things like that. So he says, why not? Why, therefore, this may be the solution for a country. But if you lose that, then your country goes down. So if you look at what he said was, there have been episodes of civilizations rising and falling in tandem from time to time, with the presence or absence of a high achievement motive in people. This motive, which McClellan calls NH, helped the society to achieve high economic growth on a we are talking about why entrepreneurship is important. Entrepreneurship is not merely, now sometimes what governments do is, they just get people and then try to get them to develop a business plan and then try to get them to execute. It fails because they don't have that element of the need to achieve. Sometimes they can't bear failure. If they fail once, they will give up. But what this guy said, if you have this NH, you will fail even 100 times and succeed. Because this kind of thing drives you to achieve. So how do you develop that? This is a very interesting kind of thing what McClellan said. In fact, here are some, this goes pretty fast, no? We are studying sometimes nation building, something like the pyramid. But a lot of innovations went there. We really don't know. A lot of people can't even believe that it was done by normal people. They even say someone from outer space came and did it. That's negating the idea that normal people can't do it, right? So they can't believe that normal people did it. So they say someone from outer space had to come and do this, which is not true, really speaking. So what are the instruments they had to build this? If you look at the Great Pyramid, for example, it has 7,025 square meters at the base. It is 146 meters high, and the base structure is off only by 18 centimeters. How did they manage to? They didn't have theodolites. They didn't have any survey equipment. Even the wheel was not invented. So how did they take the blocks that they built were really 2 million blocks of stone, each 2.5 tons, perfect cube. The only instrument they had was the lever. The mechanical advantage of pushing it up on a ramp. They made a ramp like that and pushed it right up and then placed the thing. So it's, I mean, amazing. What drove them to do that? That's more important to understand. It's very easy to say someone came from outer space and did it. That's to say that our guys couldn't do it, but they did it. Every society has this kind of thing. Even our own society. I once made a presentation to the Institute of Engineers, and they also had done a good survey on this Bisokotua thing. So one of the earliest valving systems that was constructed by our guys. In fact, some time ago when I was working, I had some work to do on the Ulhitio radial gates when I was an engineer, and during that time they discovered an aqueduct, some water that moved through a channel which flowed upwards. The water flowed upwards, 1 in 120 meters, 1 meter in 100, that's a hell of a lot. So they were wondering how that happened. But if you go to find out that the earth is not stable and we are rotating, right? There is water is the most unstable thing on earth. It will take that force of that rotation, which is called the Coriolis component. In mechanical engineering, we call it the Coriolis component, which is a free thing, and it moved out. They use that force of the Earth's rotation. Now in a sink, it's like that. You can plug out, it will turn in one direction. Right on the equator, it goes straight down. Above the equator, it goes the other way. Because of this Coriolis component. That was known by those guys. And they made use of that. So, at that time, we had a very powerful society. We had a very powerful society and a civilization, typically Anuradhapura type of civilizations and things like that. Very powerful. So, we lost that. So, sometimes this was also important also. Following McClellan's thing, what we are trying to say is that if these were possible at a prehistoric type of period, why not now? What is the thing, that element that really propels this? So according to McClellan, it was this element called need for achievement. It has to be built, according to him, in child rearing practices. A very strange sociological thing that you need to get children to take challenges and also do good things at a very early stage and be less dependent. That is what it's talking about. Then you develop this need to achieve by yourself sometimes, and you find that you can't do it by yourself. So you need to couple with someone also has need for achievement, and then it becomes a society for need for achievement. So McClellan wrote his famous book, if you can pick it up, it's a little boring reading, but it's called The Achieving Society. He wrote it in 1960. I was for many years trying to get this book, but now it's again been reprinted. It's very surprising that I picked it up at Vijitayapa bookshop in a new cover and all that kind of thing, fully updated, the same writings of McClellan. Maybe people want to read it again. It's very interesting. Okay, so therefore what we are saying is that what we try to say is why entrepreneurship is so important for the developing of a country is without that we have no help. We have to always look for other people to come and tell us what to do. And also you will not know economic growth in any low income, middle income or even high income countries. Now the US is no more the center of the world. Why? Because they have less innovations. And Trump is trying to do it in the wrong way, right? What he is trying to do is, he is trying to get back all the manufacturing to US. Manufacturing is a low end of the value addition, really speaking. Today value addition is more on branding and the marketing part of it. They have come to that level, but they are not using it. And those guys now have to be retrained, and they can't be retrained to do manufacturing. There are some good manufacturing centers in the US still, but to compete with other countries like China and places like that, I think they have long way, long way, so it's not the right way to go. Probably they have to be innovative on other things. So that's sometimes important too. What are your ideas, I mean, about one of the big problems is Sri Lanka, okay? We are always saying something about Sri Lanka. What's wrong with Sri Lanka? Sometimes why we are not that innovative and things like that. The number of patents that are, even at the whole level of the entrepreneurship starts with research, really speaking. Someone is doing research. Now we have research centers like the ITI, the Nerd Institute, very appropriate name. Right? Okay. Right. I don't mind saying because I am an engineer. So, really speaking, so they are doing something, but someone has to bring those things into the market. That is where the entrepreneurship is. Entrepreneurship is a whole cycle of innovation, invention to innovation. Someone invents something, but the real entrepreneurship is to commercialize that. That is the action of entrepreneurship. There are so many scientific innovations which are just shelved. Sometimes I tell our own guys at PIM to go and read some of the old research documents that were done. They are in the library. There are ideas. You can, if you read one or two of those, suddenly an idea will strike you. You ask, why can't you do this? That guy couldn't do it because he's a researcher. Maybe. But someone who sees the opportunity of taking this to the market in some way or the other will do it. Now, social media is a big area today. A lot of new things coming out, no? So these are important things. So the question is, this is the question that everyone asks, why others are not like the entrepreneurs? So what makes an entrepreneur? Right? So what research has come out with is that there are basically 4 areas that have to be there for a person to be successful as an entrepreneur. He may start off in the market, but to be successful, there are 4 essential areas that have to be looked into. One is very basically entrepreneurial characteristics, what we normally refer to as PECs, personal entrepreneurial characteristics, PECs, PECs, normally they are referred to as that. Personal entrepreneurial competencies. Now the earlier assumption was that people are born with these, or their parents have given it, because there are people like that. But if we are going to wait for people to be born, we have to wait a long time. So the management theory is you can train people to have these competencies through certain things. Now that is also area of entrepreneurship, to find say entrepreneur training or entrepreneur development is also an entrepreneurship thing. Now for example, we have an incubator now, Genesis, that is entrepreneurial development. We are trying to help entrepreneurs to, so there are 2 sides to it. So you can train, you can do all those kind of things to develop on. But here are the typical characteristics of an entrepreneur. That you need to be innovative. Everyone can be innovative. Actually, when you are pushed into a corner, you will be innovative. When you are challenged, you will be innovative. That everyone has that ability. That is a survival mechanism. Why we are today out of the jungle is because we have been innovative. We have continuously innovated new things so that we live outside the jungle. If we lived in the jungle, we would have got extinct most likely. Seriously. I don't know. Today we are in this environment. We are talking about abstract things and all that, but we are living. We are having a life. But we have created an artificial environment outside the jungle through innovation. And to aid that, what has really happened is our brains have evolved so that we can innovate. Right? We innovate. Of course, where animals are also developing in some way through adaptation. That's another form of innovation. You can adapt. What another person does, say for example, Samsung of course has some issues these days, but Samsung particularly was an adapter. They were not the innovator. Now they are slowly innovating as well. But when the mobile, iPhone came in, they quickly studied the iPhone, and sometimes they came at a low price. So that means they have innovated on the process. If you come in at a low price, that is you are innovating on the process. If you innovate on the product, then you are adding value. You are adding more value, buyer value, and you are giving a different feature. So mobiles have been evolving. Like for example, today there are more than a mere phone. No? There are computers, there are cameras, there are a lot of things. The next thing they are coming in, they are going to be biometric. Already they are biometric, no? So because you swipe, no, that is biometric to some extent, but you get more complex biometric, put it against your body, and if you can see your blood pressure, then it's biometric. So a simple device like that has been continuously being innovated. Because of competition, they have to innovate fast. When you are pushed to survive, as a company, you have to innovate. Tom Peters also said the same thing, no? If you don't innovate in the market, you will die. Seriously. Innovate or die. So, it's a survival mechanism. When we want to develop ourselves, you have to innovate your own lives. Do some new things. Okay. So, I think if I was doing engineering, I would have retired and gone home by now. Seriously. So, I had to find some, of course, I was pushed into it. Right? So, I was pushed into it due to experiences and things like that. I slowly moved out, and now I have something that till I drop, I can keep working. I like to work, so basically I will never retire. I will do something else. Now I am contemplating doing art, because I do art. Right? So I think that's another area you can do at your own pace. So I think I can afford to do that now. There was a time we couldn't afford to do that. Right? So sometimes you have to keep innovating yourself continuously to survive. So this is entrepreneurship basically. So this innovative thing is every day. They say sometimes, this is what Tom Peters said. Tom Peters said, if you want to innovate, count the number of innovations you can do for a day. Because basically management says that you can't manage anything unless you measure it, no? So Tom Peters is saying, okay, so therefore calculate the number of innovations, and if you can try to increase it, then you are becoming more innovative. Purposefully you can do that. Small things. Sometimes the way you are writing a note can be innovative. Sometimes the way you archive something can be innovative. If something is really bothering you, there are so many things that bother us, no? My next door neighbor's dog was bothering me. So I innovated. I got friendly with the fellow. So now he doesn't go to mess around with me. Because people ask him why that fellow is now friendly with me. Right? So I used to every day put a small packet of food for the fellow. Now the neighbor wouldn't have liked that because they give the fellow pellets or something like that. So now the fellow comes wagging his tail when I go, are they real nuisance? He ripped my hand one day, you know. And I had tried to do this and I tore my hand by doing that. So eventually I quickly, early morning, this happened about so many years ago. So what happened was immediately without waking anyone in the house, I got into my car and drove to Dern's. Where I know that government hospitals sometimes might put me in a queue. So those fellows immediately, and those nurses were very happy to see me, I don't know why. And they want to get me to lower my trousers or so I'm behind to give an injection. So, anyway, I think there are so many things that bother us, no? Yeah, what? What? I know they were laughing anyway, but I don't know why they were laughing, but anyway, they were laughing and they gave me the injection. Anyway.
Nothing happened to dog.
Dog, nothing happened to the dog. The dog went mad or something. Neighbor tried to pay the bill, but I said, no, don't worry about that. I mean, there are so many things that bug us, no, every day. I mean, then don't just let it be. Because typical Sri Lanka suffer. When there's something that bothers them, they really fuss and they curse. So instead of cursing, this one guy said, no, when the lights go up, don't curse the darkness, light a candle. You know, that famous statement. It's always something. That is why innovations are not big things. Small things lead to big things, but you can start somewhere. You basically don't curse when something goes wrong. Try to do something about it. So it could be social, it could be some product that you have or something like that. And when you find that, you'll find there are so many other people who have the same problem. Then it becomes a product which is marketable. I mean, if there are so many other people who are cursing in the dark, you can sell it to them. I mean, so these are some very simple ideas. This entrepreneurship is a very simple thing that way when you look at it. But a lot of research has been done, so we have to talk about the concepts. The next one is action-oriented. That what we mean by action-oriented is proactive. Proactive. Proactive means, you know, the difference between reactive and proactive is normally we are used to react. If we see someone's face we don't like, we try to avoid the guy, right? That is reaction. But proaction is this, okay, I'll talk to this guy today. You know, that kind of thing, which is a little problematic. You know, sometimes you say, why should I be doing that? But it requires a little bit of extra energy from the system to do that, right? So you have to try that out. I told you really these exercises, those days we had some very strange lecturers in our MBA when we were doing MBA. I don't know whether our guys are strange now. Those days there was a lady who taught us from Harvard. We used to, at early days we had people come in like that. That is how we developed also. Basically this lady actually was Professor Rita Weathersby. She came from Harvard. She was a Harvard professor. And for her sabbatical, that is how we used to do it. They came on their sabbatical, so they didn't have to be paid. You know. They were being paid already by their universities. So it's a very innovative way we started actually getting people who came on the sabbatical. So 1 year she taught us leadership, and one of the things she did was, she told us to do something that we thought we can never do and come and report on that. I told you about this. Okay. And we had to do it with someone else also. So the guy I proposed to do it was Nayana Deigama. You know Nayana?
Yeah.
You know that. You asked Nayana about this. How we went to Majestic City and polish shoes of people.
Free.
Yeah, free. Yeah, so what we did is immediately we went into there was, before Food City came, there was another supermarket there. Got to the rubbing creams, right? I took the brown one, I think, and he took the black one, I can't remember. But we put to both and asked whether, are you a moonshiner or are you a sunshiner? Now the fact is, we took a bit of risk because at that time we were doing respectable jobs. And do this thing kind of thing was a bit of risk. And if we say, for example, if a relation or someone saw, even a neighbor for that matter, these were polishing shoes in Majestic City, little of social come down kind of thing, little of risk, social risk. But for some reason or the other, we did it. And initially people were thinking we were doing a promotion. Then they asked, what are you, why? So we want to make you happy, that's why we are doing it, right? So we also now, we have got into, when you do something like that, something happens in you, right? So really, And suddenly within about 1 hour that entire environment there changed. Everything changed. And even this Sam the man fellow, you know, that guy came and he's asking, can I also have a brush? So he asked why? He said, my whole life I have been a moonshiner. So therefore we gave him also, and he was the third person who was rubbing, polishing shoes. High fun. So I think everything changed. So when you do some, those are called stretchers. Stretchers, when you do a stretch, always something remains. You are never afraid to do something like that again in public. Not, you don't do that, but anything you do, you can go and talk to people. Something happens psychologically in your system. When you do something that you thought you can never do, it alters, it's a kind of a behavior modification. Something happens. So she was a professor of psychology. That's why she felt that Sri Lankans were very cool guys. They sat in one place and waited. They didn't do anything. So you want to do something. Now other guys also did some interesting things like that. So I think action-oriented is because of that. If you can actually see something and you don't mind taking a choice, making a choice without reacting. What will I do? So extremely self-confident. That's something that you need to build up. The optimistic side of it. Very often you don't look like what will happen if this happens. It might fail. But if you say that it can also succeed, it might fail, but you go with, up to the time it fails, you go with the idea that it will succeed. And when it fails, you still have some energy to take it up again. So these are all psychological things we are kind of looking at, ideal psychological makeup. When we are talking about entrepreneurial characteristics, they are behavioral things, behaviors, and that can be seen by other people. Behaviors always are seen by other people. It's not a mental thing. It's a behavioral thing. So, proaction is very important. Being achievement oriented, to be decisive, and also affiliation oriented. One of the most successful things about entrepreneurs is they can work with others. Eventually you might get a very autocratic manager, but that guy does not work with others sometimes. So that's not an entrepreneur. But you can, some of the entrepreneurs appear to be aggressive, but they are like coaches. You know, when you play rugby, coaches play hell with us, no? I mean, they insult us, do everything, but we don't get angry with the guys. For temporarily we get kind of insulted a little bit, but eventually we maintain a good idea in our head about the guys, most often. So I think to be a coach takes away the entire thing. If you are, this is the affiliation oriented things. Two affiliation oriented things that an entrepreneur does with his people, he might appear to the others as being a kind of a driver. But the fact is, he is doing two things. One is that he has a strong drive on coaching. He wants actually things done how he wants. So he tells how to do it. On the other hand, he mentors also. That's the soft side. He will give advice. He will say, okay, look at the guy's personal life and things like that. He buffers that side also quite well. So he can only give orders, but he also looks after the guy in some way. So that is the mentoring part of it. So that guy, he actually is committed to the entrepreneur. So the entrepreneur needs to take a lot of people with him. The entrepreneur takes risk. And the people also take risk. Sometimes when a person starts an organization, he has to persuade some of the good guys to join him, because one thing is the entrepreneur will never take a laid back guy at the beginning. He will always look for a good guy to work with him. And good guys are in demand. So sometimes good guys are also conservative. They are not entrepreneurs. They do things well. So now this guy has to persuade those guys to join him. And they come. Why do they come? Because actually they are getting some life out of that. That's very important. So that affiliation oriented part of it is how you keep people together. How you actually leverage from people is a very powerful competency. So these, we look at some of these competencies. Where McClellan was concerned, he listed somewhere 25 competencies. Some of the things that are not here. I have uploaded, I think, a document which I have collected some information from various, that one. That second one, that one. If you look at that, there are little excerpts from McClellan. Yeah, that's the one. He's talking about various competencies and things like that. But McClellan really made a, where I was concerned when I did my research, I found that McClellan I had very bold to say that he had mistaken this use of this affiliation. He felt that it was a driver. I felt that it's not driver, it's a moderator. Because what happens is, he felt that it's a driver, but I felt that it's a moderator. You know the difference between a driver and a moderator? Actually, that thing we can use, no?
Yeah, you can pull it through.
Okay. See, McClellan said that definitely NH was a driver, need for achievement was a driver. And in power, that is need for power, was also a driver. He also said that need for affiliation was a driver. But what I felt is, now these are drivers, and if you couple these two, it will provide entrepreneurial success. But he had also put NF, need for affiliation, as a driver. What I came, when I did research, I found that there was more evidence to say that it was a moderator, NF. Because it moderated two things. I have put it this way actually. It moderated need for achievement from what McClellan, see, McClellan's research was in Western societies. The culture in Western societies is largely individualistic, largely, I wouldn't say always. So when a person wants to achieve, he wants personal achievement. But in our societies, a larger group also has to go with him, like a family or sometimes friends. There is a group that works. We are, I would say, we are kind of not totally collectivistic, but we like to work with others, right? So something like that. So therefore, this affiliation moderated achievement to a collective achievement. Collective achievement, and also it moderated this need for power, which McClellan looked at as an individualistic or personal power, to a social power. I felt that it moved into social power because ultimately my research in the MBA was on social power basis. Social power basis. At that time there was so much of, even the parliament, now the parliament, 60% of the parliament does not have even O level. Seriously, we have a serious problem. Right? These are being recorded, no, I don't want to say these things. Right? Right. So, yeah?
It's a fact.
True, no? But those days when I did 1989, I did the research, what I found is that this was a different thing, that about 60 to 80% of the people in parliament were third generation outcomes of entrepreneurial families at that time. Third generation. So what really happened was, my research eventually talks about the social power being built in the Samajavale, being built as a driver for, as a key driver for Sri Lankan entrepreneurship, that you want to make your family and clan powerful, was confirmed actually. So the basis of social power were like traditional power, like land and capital and things like that. Professional power, some of the family members became very good professionals eventually, because even the entrepreneur some of the entrepreneurs, early entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka, like Mahamarakalage Laris Kure.
I'm not sure what you
Someone is challenging me. Okay. So, you know, you have heard of him. Actually, he started with absolute poverty. This guy in Vadur, but he started a distillery, which eventually the Kures actually. All children of that family were sent for London in education in one life. People like Edmund Kure, famous Edmund Kure, who started HNB at National Bank. Dr. J.L.M. Kure, who was a legal, Dr. Michael Kure. They were all, with that money, sent to, within one generation, sent to London for education and all qualified as very powerful individuals. So this social power in professionalism is another base of social power. Even if the entrepreneur was not educated, he insisted that his children were educated in the best of places. Education was one of the priorities to create this social power base. The other one was religious power. Actually, they all got connected up as Dayakyas and people like that in temples and churches and places like that. Because they were nodes of power. You could meet people and actually build some kind of social power of networking. The other one was political power. At least one or two members of the family entered the political stream. So as a result of it, I tracked it on 3 generations. So because my research was on 100-year-old companies, there were only about 7 or 8 I could check out who had lasted 100 years. And I checked it, went generation by generation to see how social power was built up. So it was interesting actually. So this was, okay, so now these are entrepreneurial characteristics. Another very important area was an opportunity. There are opportunities everywhere, but everyone doesn't see the opportunities. It's a very strange thing. Right? There are opportunities. Every second there is an opportunity to do something. Right? So, where are these opportunities? They are in the environment. Environment is beyond our control. Things are happening outside there. That's the world. So even when there is a chaotic situation, there are more opportunities thrown up. When we study opportunity recognition, we have a area where we talk about opportunity. You will find that the typical conservative guy says, look, it's a bad environment, we can't work. The environment is bad. But the entrepreneur is quite different. He sees some opportunity even in chaotic situations. So these are kind of very strange thing. Like for example, 3M. 3M is a company that sees opportunities in critical safety. When there was the East Asian, they said they had the SARS virus. When they had the SARS virus, they innovated the mask. The 3M mask is still supposed to be a good mask. The thing they invented for managing, because that was not uncomfortable to wear. You know how they developed the 3M mask? See, they have a culture in their organization of learning from mistakes. That's a very important culture for entrepreneurship. For example, the post-it and all those things like that came from mistakes. They came from mistakes. But this particular mask is because they have told the guys that they could have, there is a thing they call bootlegging. That is, you could go out on your own to any other company and find the mistakes of that company and see whether you can develop a product from that. So these guys actually went to a lingerie company which was making bra making, and they had found a mistake of a bra, right? And they took it out and one guy just fitted it on his face, and it fitted his face properly. Seriously, this is really what happened. And they asked this guy, could you make 1 cup and not 2 cups? So they said, yeah, no problem. So that is the beginning of the 3M 3M mask. They turn someone else's mistake into an opportunity for them. So, I mean, so this is very interesting stuff. I actually, when I went to Singapore some time ago, I wrote the country paper at one time, for Sri Lanka's country paper, and presented it at a conference in Singapore. And this 3M guy came and made a presentation, and he asked that question. So no one answered that. So I was also reluctant, because he asked, can you tell how this came? So I want to crack a joke also, but anyway, I said, it's a lingerie item. He said, okay, say it. So I said what it was. He gave me that whole packet of stuff. You know, all the stuff he brought to give. So I distributed among all the other guys. So we were not done. No, I can take those things. So eventually, that's how I learned really what they did. But it's recorded in the web as well. So where do you get environments? Where do you get opportunities? There is a structured way also. That's why we look at entrepreneurship as a management subject. We should see a structured way also. No? In all the typical pest factors, what we call political, economic, social, pestal, environmental, legal, there are opportunities. So structurally, that is how Peter Drucker looked at how an entrepreneur could look at. Drucker wrote a book on entrepreneurship. And in that is highly structured way of approaching entrepreneurship. So there is an innovative technology. You could go and ask. Sometimes there are things that are thrown away. If you go to ITI or these research places, there are failed products. They have archived them because they have the documentation. Everything is there. All the documentation is there. Recently, you have heard of the Slintech Nanotechnology Institute. They did some research, some biomedical product, and Sri Lanka government couldn't invest on that. So they didn't go beyond the paper. An Indian company came and bought that for something like 30 million rupees. Just those 4 papers. Just on the idea. They took it and made something else. So it's amazing. I mean, so this is. So you get innovative technologies, sometimes an attractive market which people has emerged. There are risks, sometimes risks that you look at are like market, technology, team, financial risks are there. And exactly that is how you would look at this. Okay, so now that is another important factor for entrepreneur to be successful. That is, he should develop the ability to see opportunities. You can develop that. Very, as a habit. Habits can be developed, no? You kind of, supposing you have a group of people and they have a habit of asking each other, okay, what did you see today? What is the new thing you saw today? Any ideas? However crazy. Because idea generation does not mean that all those ideas will become good products. They may be really absurd. Later on you go through the feasibility and things like that to see whether it's feasible. If it's not feasible, you don't even throw it away, you archive it. One day you will be able to use it. So, so you must create a practice of meeting and asking, okay, what did you see today? So people get into the habit of looking for opportunities. So that's important. The other area is the execution. This is where most of the entrepreneurs fail. They say 80% of the startups fail after 2 years. Why? Because they might start a very innovative product. Still it's in the stage of innovation. It has to be worked on, it has to be modified. Very often when we do small business, generally we talk about that, about lean startup. You never start up by investing a hell lot. Ideally don't invest with any money. Invest with whatever you have. That is called a lean startup. Because if you look at even how Apple came in, there was hardly any investment initially because Wozniak had the idea of a product, but of how a product should be of the Apple, but Jobs saw the market really, and he said that it's not only the motherboards that you have to do, but the entire thing which the customers will want, I think you...
I want to speak to you for a minute. Sorry for the disturbance.
Okay. Anything?
Please fly to
Yeah. We're talking about jobs, hardly any investment. So when we are sometimes at the startup itself, good management is required for startup. We have to break even as early as possible. That's the whole idea. Because you have series of break-evens at different levels of investment. So initial investment is hardly anything if you can. That's why we call lean startup. We always encourage people to start up lean. Because what happens is then you can experiment with the market and find your real model. Because you may have some assumptions about the market. But when you start working, the assumptions will not be exactly what you thought. They may be the reality, you face the reality. When you face the reality, you shift. So sometimes this is quite contrary to have a business plan right at the beginning. There is a big argument of when you should have the business plan. For lean startup, we don't need a business plan as such. It is only an idea of how you, at the idea stage, you do the prototype and then get into the market and experiment for some time without much investment. And then you learn from the market and then you keep adding on features till you get the perfect thing. Then you look for the investment. So that is one of the lessons in management for a startup. But the other lesson is when you have developed a particular product and it is sometimes a lead, the whole idea is you need to develop to try to as fast as possible. This might take about 5 years or so to develop a cash cow for your organization. So we are now talking about strategy, and now the company is becoming a little more conservative. Typically, if you look at the life cycle, you have started off with one product, but you can't proceed because the product has its limited range. Somewhere here, you start launching a more kind of a bigger product sometimes. So the whole idea is, you know what this, you're familiar with these things, no? Yeah, so you have the cash cow here, you have the stars, sorry, the question marks, the stars here and the dogs here. So now the whole idea is that on this side you have what's really referred to as market growth rate, and on this side, this way, you have relative market share. So if you can stay, anything on this side is a leadership position. Only problem is that stars have to be supported continuously for advertising and things like that. You have to have a budget for that. To maintain it and eventually promote it into a cash cow, where competition has more or less given up. Market is getting saturated, the market growth rate has dropped. But you are a cash cow. That is, if you are a cash cow, you can be a source of internal funding. Only then you should really fund a new product. So this sequence is not often followed because people don't know about this thing. They try to immediately get 2 products, 3 products at the same time. So that requires management knowledge. So one of the biggest failures in entrepreneurs after 5 years is because the sequence of funding is not okay. So that's the time they try to get professionals into the organization. But very often there is a conflict of trust, I would say, among entrepreneurs and very often entrepreneurs and professionals, because entrepreneur sees a professional as a brake, you know, like the brake, whereas he's like the accelerator. So very often he can't do anything and there is a conflict. So ideally if the entrepreneur also knows management, that he can balance his own kind of ideas about this whole thing. So that is why we look at really management as a key element of sustainability and execution. Well, at various stages, especially when you have a portfolio of products, so many products, then you should think of business planning and things like that, because you have to now get funding from outside. You are onto a gearing kind of situation and you have to get loans, you have your own equity and things like that, and it's more advantageous to go on that track. So then you start writing about business plans. Ideally, the new thinking is, although PIM is insisting on business plans before starting up, you can make it a lean business plan. A very basic idea about how you would start up and things like that. Some time ago we were insisting, our entrepreneurship skills project, that you should have 1 million investment. Now we don't insist on that. Now we don't insist on that for simple reason that that is not the way to start, really speaking. You might be investing on an idea which is not, when you actually go into practice. No business plan can give you the perfect idea of the market. You have only some idea. So you have to get into the market and see, then make the business plan. When you really know that this is going to work, then you, at least it will be survival. Nothing survives continuously. At least you have a reasonable life cycle for that product, then you invest on it. Otherwise not worth. It's a failure. That's why sometimes people keep failing continuously. So lean startup is management, really, that's management. How you would enter with minimal risk. Now, this is really in practice how entrepreneur developers also do is like that now. If you look at microfinance, successful microfinance companies in Sri Lanka, for example, like Hatton National Bank's Gamibubudu, they follow that principle of lean startup. See, what they do is very basically, see, banks are not really in the business of loaning to entrepreneurs, but you can create one of the problems they have is for collateral and track record. They insist on that for creditworthiness. So if you are going without that, what's the risk you can take? So what they do is, they go into a village, generally village, there are a lot of talent, people who want to develop the village, so that is the driver. And they identify young people who would like to start small businesses, like roti joints and things like that, winkles, that kind of thing, and give a very small loan, which are low risk, 25,000, 50,000 loans. Also the guarantees, they try to predict this guy's success, his potential, rather than his collateral. Will this guy succeed? So they go into the village network to find out about this guy, whether what kind of a person this guy is, and that is the risk they take with the guy, very small risk. So very often they succeed. When they succeed, they go to a second level of connecting them up with the other customers of the bank who are having channels of distribution and things like that. Or even sometimes the bank also might up the loan to some extent, because now there is track record. Now there is track record. And some of those guys, actually, the recovery rate on Gamibubudu is something 88%, 89% recovery rate. It's very good. So they are basing on this lean startup kind of thing. So management, these are the important areas. The business plan is important, but not at the startup. I would say that it is sometimes what you need is only an idea, which is put down there. So these are the key areas for successful entrepreneurs. Of course, this is drawn in a peculiar way, showing things coming like that. That is not the traditional way of drawing a model. The traditional way of drawing a model is like this. So here you will talk about these things like, I would say that entrepreneurial characteristics, entrepreneurial PECs, personal entrepreneurial characteristics. Execution. They are key drivers. But these other two things, like environment, opportunity environment, is a moderator, and strong business plan, they are, this is an external moderator, this is an internal moderator. These are traditional way of drawing this same model. If you are trying to separate moderators, and I'm going a little bit on theory side also, because although you are not going to do research, when you are writing a case study, those are important. Some of you are thinking of writing case studies, right? Who is thinking of writing case studies? Why? You're writing, no, you are studying business, no? Yeah. Yeah? No one is writing case studies. A lot of people, I have a big problem there, because most of the guys are writing case studies. But thing is, if you're writing a case study, you study in an entrepreneur, case study of entrepreneurial company, you have to make a framework like that. And then have a timeline and try to look at, so you have to first establish, I am going to talk about those things on the last 2 sessions for case studies and entrepreneurial skills projects, so that you all can start early. Okay, because what, your options are only one of those 2 things, no?
Yeah, we have 3.
3, what is the third one?
One
Field study.
Field study. No, not the field, it is a site development or something like that.
No.
Field survey,
Field
industry survey.
Industry.
Can you all go and do industry survey? See here, people might not give details and study.
It's not field study.
Can't know?
Yeah, it's even
Yeah.
unless you are in that.
Yeah, I know. Even so, you can't publish, no? So also for a field, that kind of thing, you have to get permission, no? One of the conditions is that you have to get a written permission from whoever you are writing about. Otherwise, they can sue us. So yeah, if you write something a little different, and you have to be critical also, as an MBA student, you have to be critical. You can't. It's not a newspaper article kind of thing, no. It's a critical analysis of something. So sometimes you might have to say the good things, the bad things, all those kind of things you have to say. What is it? Are we having breaks?
Yeah, we have to. Because we took it late, we can have a quick break and come back.
Yeah.